Good evening. I'm Karen Larson. Thank you so much for joining us as we continue our conversation about hidden bias here on Two Works for You. Right now, we have a very special panel of guests lined up, and they are ready to dig into hidden bias. Clifton Talbert is an international lecturer, entrepreneur, and author of the book Once Upon a Time When We Were Colored. He serves on multiple community boards. We're so glad to have him here tonight. Philip Armstrong is the program director for the Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission. He serves on numerous community nonprofit boards, is a Leadership Tulsa graduate and a member of the Rotary Club, as well as a very talented singer. Risha Grant is the CEO and founder of Risha Grant LLC, specializing in diversity, equity, and inclusion, communications, counseling, and training. Her clients include Samsung Electronics, Levi Strauss, Google, even Harvard University, to name just a few. She's also a contributor here at Two Works for You. Karen Keith is the Tulsa County Commissioner for District 2, a native Oklahoman. She has been the Rotary Club president, serves on numerous boards such as the Oklahoma Historical Society, among others. Before serving her community, she spent more than 21 years with KGRH as a news anchor. Marcia Bruno Todd is the Director of Programs and Community Impact for Leadership Tulsa. Marcia serves as a consultant to area nonprofits for diversity, equity, and inclusion. She lectures about developing partnerships, focusing on educational equity as a means of really achieving social justice. She's also working on her doctorate in education. Rose Washington heads the Tulsa Economic Development Corporation, a leader in local economic growth, focusing on enlightening people, enabling small business, and really developing community partnerships with a variety of stakeholders. She's also the first African-American chair of the Tulsa Regional Chamber and serves on numerous boards. Tomas, or Tammy Hilbert, is a member of the Amplify team, a youth health collective that provides resources for teenagers to really help them make the best decisions for their health. As program coordinator for the Youth Leadership Council, Tomas is committed to promoting body-positive self-expression to anyone and everyone, and worked with Campfire Green Country for the past 5 years. Aliyah Shimi is the executive director of the Tulsa Metropolitan Ministry, Tulsa's oldest interfaith organization. A Tulsa-born Muslim, she is dedicated to promoting religious understanding and cooperation in all communities. She also provides Muslim cultural competency training to area law enforcement and serves on the Tulsa Commission on Community Policing and the city's Community Advisors Oversight Committee. So good evening to all of our panelists tonight. We thank you so much for joining us. Why don't I begin with Clifton Talbert. Clifton, you have spoken all around the world about these topics. What is your takeaway from our special tonight with Dr. Marks? Dr. Clifton, if you could unmute yourself, please.
Yes, just did.
There you go.
Dr. Bryant's conversation was very compelling. I listened to it all the way through. And I think the thing that really struck me as I thought about the work that I do and where I've done that work is the idea, how do you get people to think in terms of, I may have said something wrong, because most times that's not how people think, especially if that thought is not an intentional thought to hurt or harm. And that gave me really pause to think, how can I be much more of an advocate for understanding that we can uncover our better selves? And this really came home to me in Australia. We're working with the Aboriginals and the challenge that they face, which is not unlike some of the challenges that African Americans faced in our country. But again, it was the same type of undergirding, same types of conversation. And I think that our speaker on the program that I watched yesterday just really brought it home, that we have an opportunity to do something and we can make a difference and not to skirt that opportunity.
Aliyah, before this program, when you and I were talking about, he really just opened the door to the dialogue. Your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I love the way that Dr. Marks was able to, right off the bat, tell everybody has an implicit bias. Whenever you hear the word implicit bias, anytime we have conversations, no, I don't have an implicit bias. I love everybody. This is immediately what I hear from people. And right off the bat, he said, if you have a brain and if you're in society, you have an implicit bias. And so being honest with ourselves and, coming to terms with what those implicit bias are and then putting in the work to be able to get past those implicit bias, educating ourselves about those communities or, individuals or groups that we have those implicit bias with, I think is really important. And I love the way that he's able to tackle this topic.
Risha, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, just to piggyback on what was just said, that was the biggest thing to me. It's the biggest thing that I see in my work. I had the opportunity to speak to over 50,000 people last year, and there are so many people who still don't understand or agree that we all have implicit bias.
Risha, we just lost your microphone. Testing 1, 2. Okay, we'll come back to Risha in just a second. She'll work on that. Tomas, you had a point that you wanted to make about hidden bias that you thought wasn't covered.
Yeah, I really like the presentation first off. I really loved the idea of acknowledging that we all have implicit biases because we all have different sorts of identities, right? And some of those sometimes carry power and responsibility, and some of those are marginalized. So being able to kind of address that and acknowledge that like it is a growing process and a call to action was amazing. At one point in the video, he mentioned that this society we live in is very youth oriented, and I feel like that may be that may apply to our values of beauty and appearance. But with the work I do in leadership groups and also promoting teen health and getting that information and resources out there, I find that it's very easy to count youth leaders out because a lot of adults assume that they don't have the experience they need to carry out large projects. And I work at Amplify, and I work with a youth council that is literally doing large scale city projects and teaching me things while they're at it. So it's one of those things that, yeah, acknowledging our adult biases sometimes, because when I was in high school, I don't remember feeling incompetent. I do remember adults maybe questioning my validity in certain fields, and kind of as the next generation, I want to give back and make sure that those youth leaders feel supported.
That's great. All right, Risha, you want to come back to you? We're still having problems hearing you, Risha. I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on.
Okay, how is this?
There we go. Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
You would think I didn't do this every day, but I was saying in my work, I had the opportunity to speak to over 50,000 people last year. And the fact that so many people told me they just don't feel as if they have implicit bias, I see as a huge problem in and of itself. Because if we would just recognize that there are certain people that make us feel uncomfortable, why we feel uncomfortable around those people, then we can begin to work on our hidden biases that we have about other people.
Absolutely. Rose, you work a lot in the business world, obviously helping launch businesses, young entrepreneurs get going. How is bias impacting them? What are you seeing in your line of work?
Well, at Tulsa Economic Development Corporation, we provide progressive lending to promising businesses. And we do so really because the banking system has implicit bias embedded in it. And so if you're younger, if you lack collateral, if you are just starting a business, you just don't fit into the box that's been created through traditional lending institutions. And so we're that place where people can come and find the capital to launch their businesses. And so every day we see the opportunity for someone to implement an idea that is great and could have a huge economic impact, but access to capital is very limited for many different reasons. And one reason is because that box that's been created by traditional channels has implicit bias embedded within it. Karen, another thing I wanted to add is that for me, this lecture by Dr. Marks really reminded me that implicit bias is just not about race. I grew up in rural Mississippi with my grandmother, who was a sharecropper. And for us, I only thought about the implicit bias being related to the fact that we were Black, we were African American, and Caucasians seem to have greater benefits, greater access to everything. And now what I have to remind myself of is that it's about much more than race, although we have a lot to overcome. In terms of race, we have to be sensitive to everything else that distinguishes us, that makes us diverse and unique and beautiful.
Yes.
And I was reminded watching Dr. Mark's presentation tonight.
Yes, he did emphasize gender and age as being two of the key biases that we have in our society. I found that fascinating. Karen Keith, I'm going to call on you. I was sharing earlier in our newscast about some of the things that I encountered as a young woman when I first started out in the business. I'm sure that you have encountered gender bias as well. Is there anything that you can share on that or insights for us?
Well, yes, but I grew up with three brothers and my sister, of course, but I didn't suffer too much with the gender bias, but it was clearly there. And I was listening to one of your earlier experiences, and I just sort of took some of that for granted that it was going to happen. So I'm glad things have really changed. But I did kind of want to speak to what Tomas said. And as I look to our younger people like Tomas, I am so hopeful. I feel like they're going to be leaders of the future that don't see as much bias as some of us who've been around forever. And, I want to think that I don't have them, but of course we all have them, as Dr. Marks was saying. It was just so clear. We all want to think, oh, no, I'm above all that. Well, clearly we're not. But I just so impressed with what everybody here, what we're going to learn from them tonight. So thanks for letting me be part of this.
Absolutely. We're glad as an elected official that you could be here. We really, really appreciate it. Now, Marcia, you also your focus is education, bringing communities together. What is your takeaway from the presentation tonight?
Well, along with all of the brilliance shared earlier today, I definitely agree that it's important that all of us are not immune to implicit bias. It's just how our brain functions. But what I really hope we shift the conversation to is, now what? You have it. What are you going to do about it? What are we collectively going to do about it? So I really want to just highlight the work that like Rose does with the business community, economic development. These are systems already ingrained in the processes where some people get to benefit and others don't. They just have to work a little bit harder. Now that we're aware that there's bias in systems and processes, we have a responsibility, not just to ourselves, but to our community and our future legacies, our family, our children, on what are we going to do to shift those processes? What are we going to do to shift those systems? How are we going to have those healthy disruptions in conversations to call out when something is just biased, unfair, or unfairly benefiting one particular group over another? So that's what I got out of it. And also the biggest shout out to me definitely was when I heard even my own bias elevated. I myself have said that we are a country, a nation of immigrants. And to hear that back to me, that is disregarding the history of our enslaved brothers and sisters here in our country. And not only that, disregarding the history of our indigenous Native American peoples. Mm-hmm. It was very much a learning moment for me, and it shows that we are constantly growing and moving. And I appreciate the way that he just was very plain with it. You know better, then you do better. And if you don't, that's more of an integrity issue, not necessarily an ignorance issue.
Yes. Phil, would you like to take the next step? Where do we go from here?
Well, the best example is really right in front of us on this screen. The work that the Centennial Commission has been able to do with the community over the past 5 years, and now we're going in our 6th year, and the building of Greenwood Rising, the Black Wall Street History Center. The prevailing quote that we have used that has guided us through this whole process and actually be displayed on the north face of the exterior wall is a quote by James Baldwin. It says, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." So, with this history, we're facing it together. we're no longer operating in these silos. But what this is showing us is that some of the aftermath experiences of a George Floyd is that more than people of color are saying enough is enough. We need to make some changes. We need to get together and face the fact that we have these issues. We have these problems. We are a great country and we're proud of it, but we've got to stop sweeping things under the rug. That happened a long time ago, but we're still seeing the impact and the effect of that, of what happened and what was swept under the rug. And until we sit down with each other and just name it and say, this is an issue, where do we go from here? Let's address it first. Let's acknowledge that it happened. Let's be educated from it. Let's be enlightened from it, but let's really start moving forward. And that forward being that path to racial harmony, racial reconciliation, that journey to get us from where we are to the next stage.
Now, Ali,
Phil,
go ahead, jump in.
no, go ahead,
So,
please.
Aaron, Dr. Marks talked about the fact that when we get home now, we go into our garages, and when we are with family, we're in the backyard. So we're not interacting with our neighbors. And really what that means is that the social fabric, the social capital fabric of our country has diminished a lot. So when I was a kid riding my bike down the street, the front porches were lined with families just hanging out after work, always looking out for each other. And I think what we have to do now is find another way to build that social capital and have those conversations with each other. I think the millennials and the Gen Ys and Zs are insistent on the demand that we interact with each other, we communicate with each other, we become more vulnerable, we share our intimate thoughts. And some of those thoughts may not be those that we want to share, but in terms of how we engage with each other and how we feel about each other, I think we're forced to have very integral, very intimate conversations about how we feel. And we've got to do that with people who don't look like us, people who don't act like us, people who are very diverse. And we've got to just be open and honest and willing, again, to be very vulnerable so that we can move forward really as a community, as a city, a county, a state, and as a nation, because our young people are going to insist that we do what needs to be done to rectify the woes of the past so that we can be stronger in the future.
Yes, and considering how segregated Tulsa neighborhoods are, that means those conversations are going to have to be carried out in all parts of the city. We have to travel out of our comfort zone and into others and bring people together. Clifton, you started to add in.
Yeah, what Phil had indicated, I really caught that, because as Rose, I grew up in Mississippi, but decades before Rose came along. And I faced the world that we talk about, but I lived that life. That was my life, was that world. And I understand how people can, over the years, just accumulate biases without even knowing that they've done it, because most of the people stay with the same people they always stay with, which goes to Rose's point. We are not building this, connecting the silos of relationships in the way that we should. Because sometimes when you're with other people, that's when you discover, oh, wait a minute, what did I say? But if you're with the same people all the time and they're saying the same thing you're saying, it doesn't come about as a bias. That's just who we are. We're talking. And the case in point, and Rose will understand this, at my age, my mother had an attorney, a young white attorney in Mississippi. He had to come to Tulsa to take care of some business before she passed away. So the first thing he said, I said, well, we'll get you a hotel close by. He said, I'm not staying at a hotel. He said, I'm gonna stay with you guys. And it really took me back, because that's not the world I grew up with. And I told my wife, I said, oh, by the way, he's gonna stay with us. And she said, really? I said, yeah. I said, he's from Greenville, Mississippi. That's not like, St. Louis, Missouri, Yonkers, New York. That's Greenville. That's the heart of the Delta. That's in many ways the poster child for legal segregation and all that we endured. But it was in that process of staying up to 4 o'clock in the morning talking, eating and talking, that our friendship solidified. And that to me is one of the things that we have skirted that idea. It's not just enough to come and have a cup of cappuccino together and go back to the same world with no interchange back and forth, because then things remain the same. And I think we want things to be different, and we have the capacity to do that and to make a difference.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think that there is an importance to context, right? And so context to each of us as individuals, who we are, what our identities are, and then also the context of where we live, right? Mentioning Tulsa and Greenwood, the legacy of that, it affects the generations that come after it, because we as a city have not reckoned with those wounds, and also like the messages that are sent to our community members about these implicit biases that we may have systematically that are affecting the livelihood of so many Tulsans. I work with Hope Outreach Prevention and Education. It's a testing service. And the thing about that's going on is that we're finding a lot of health disparities in these marginalized communities, because these systems are not there for these communities, because they were never truly built for them. So I'm so happy for this call to action, that we can recognize the problems, because if we don't recognize them to start, we can't go anywhere. And we've only been about 60 plus years since the civil rights movement. That's about 14% of a 400-year history. So 86% of the Black experience here in the United States has been a fight for civil rights and humanity. And then we've got that other percent where we're still fighting for that humanity. We're still trying to get the respect of being seen without these implicit biases that affect how these people navigate the world. Like he said in this special, he mentioned, imagine walking into a store and knowing that that's your brand, and how that brand was created over 400 years of just these biases becoming stereotypes, becoming acts of violence. So it's definitely, I'm very happy for the new generation of leaders, like the ones that Marcia leads as well, because it is very much something that we are continuing a legacy of fighting against and confronting those biases. And now that we're having those conversations, it can happen more freely and on a larger level.
Yeah.
I want to piggyback on to what Tomas said about those labels. I know many of my colleagues on this Zoom call, whenever we go into our meetings and we hear other people talking, and you hear our community being referred to as geographic locations. Let's say, oh, those people out east. So, they're talking about the Hispanic community. Or they say, oh, those people out north, then they're talking about the African American community. Or they'll say, south, the white privileged community, right? These labels, as Dr. Marks were talking about, just because I have a piece of cloth on my head, why am I labeled as a terrorist, right? 1.8 billion Muslims around the world are painted with this broad brush as a terrorist, right? Or as he said, when you think about a young African American, what are the 4 words that come to mind? And so, those labels, if we could just put those labels aside and stop, looking at people with labels and trying to step out of our comfort zone and have those discussions. So at TMM about 3 years ago, we started having intersection dinners, and they were very intentional, inviting communities who are completely on different ends of the spectrum, and sitting down and knowing that this is a safe space for us to have conversations, but more importantly, to listen to your other, right? To be able to put that face to your other. So a lot of people have these fears, and, you're afraid of what we're taught in the media, right? We have all this influence from the media that, African Americans are this, or illegal immigrants are that, or this and that and the other, right? And so being able to put a face to that other, and being able to listen to them and know they have children like you. They worry about paying their bills, and they worry about getting to work on time, just like you, right? And listening. And it's beautiful to hear about their diversity, right? You're different, and we can celebrate that diversity. But at the end of the day, we're all Tulsans. At the end of the day, we have to work together to be able to make this community stronger and vibrant. And so we really need to come together to have those conversations, and we need to have as many opportunities as possible to be able to be invited to those spaces, because a lot of people aren't going to step out of their comfort zone, as Mr. Talbert said. You just have those conversations with like-minded people. No, you have to step out of those comfort zones. During the past administration, we had tons of people reaching out. Church of Christ members were reaching out to Muslims like me. It's unheard of, right? When I talked to my other Christian friends and I said, "Oh yeah, I'm starting to work with Church of Christ members," and they said, "Wait a second, they don't even work with us. How are they working with you?" Right? Or if I walk in to a restaurant and I walk in with, an African-American Baptist minister, and they kind of look at us and they do a double take. Or if I'm walking in with the rabbi, they're like, these two aren't supposed to be together. So, being able to change the perspective of people around us as well.
I believe that plain and simple, we have got to build authentic relationship. That's what we're all talking about here. If we would get to know each other, we would get away from the biases for most of us. I see our biases as an unrecognizable part of our upbringing. So right, we're living through the past hurts, pains, and experiences of the people who raised us. So they've gone through different things that they don't want to see us go through, and they teach us about other people. And a lot of times they teach us that unconscious bias. And so the fear that lives within us because we've heard all of these negative things is what keeps us separated. We have to be able to move past that, because to your points earlier, the systemic racism that is embedded into all of our industries are the things that are keeping certain people with being able to benefit and other people not being able to benefit. So we have got to dismantle this system. We hear people say all the time that the system is broken, and that's just not true. It's not broken. It's working exactly as it was designed to work. So what we have to do is dismantle that system, build authentic relationship so that we can begin to live in a better, more informed world. And that's going to happen with us starting with self-education.
Education is everything. I do want to share something. We were talking about media as, one of the institutions here that shares a message. I am very, very proud of our company. We recently did basically an audit of all of our newscasts across all of the EW Scripps companies. And each and every employee was required to monitor newscasts. And we checked boxes of who was speaking, what races were representative, in what position were they in? Were they people of authority? Was it with crime? And so that kind of awareness, sitting down and frame by frame, looking at each and every one of our newscasts and how we were presenting people, were we providing a very wide voice and broad and engaging voice in our community? That is now a part of our daily conversations in each of our editorial meetings. So I am very glad to see that kind of intentional discussion happening to make sure that we are definitely being inclusive and diverse in the message that we're sharing and the people that we're covering.
Karen, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, great. I'm everyone on fire. I'm excited, but I just think through myself, really, the inspiration that we have with our youth and the opportunity of them engaging. And what I mean by that is right now, my baby girl and my son that are in 6th grade are looking at Vice President Kamala Harris, who's someone that really is the first for many different things, for many different identities, which is exactly what the special talks about, that we show up in a package of a lot of different identities. And they are having these critical conversations just because it's a fact that they have to report on, like a little quiz, a civics quiz. Who's our VP? This is it. That's already forcing it, right? Like they have that conversation. And not only that, thinking about the demographic breakdown of Tulsa alone, Tulsa public schools. We have students, Black, Indigenous, and people of color are represented as the majority of our student population in Tulsa public schools. I mean, that alone is also opportunity for authentic engagement and relationship building, and thinking, you know what, why is it that my friend Bobby is celebrating the tooth fairy when his tooth is lost, but my friend Paul Francisco is celebrating the raton to come when his tooth is lost? Like those little conversations of exposure of different cultural ways of viewing the world is happening now. And I just want to ask for all of you, because I feel kind of overwhelmed and excited with this space of giants that are in this field. What would you do to make sure that we amplify those brilliant conversations with our youth? How can we support them? How can we support them when they show us our bias? Like, how do we as adults react when they call us out? That's my question I want to push out, because I genuinely want to learn from each of you.
I would say be a model for how to be called out or called in, right? Because I know it can be a scary thing to feel like you've said the wrong thing. And that intent, even if you wanted to help these specific communities, sometimes you can approach things without knowledge. You don't know what you don't know, right? And so being able to show the next generation that it's okay to make mistakes, and also like you can still bounce back from that, acknowledge humanity, you know, and also get this generation excited that they have a supporting other generations that want to fight for the same things that they want, right? We've talked about the context of the Black experience from the past and the present. Can we fight for a future that is like working for Black folks, you know, working for our Black youth, inspiring Black leaders? Like he talked about, he works at Morehouse, and he doesn't see those biases because he's around excellence every day, right? And in Tulsa, we are around excellence every day. And so joining that fight, building those supports to support these people that may be falling through the cracks, be it whatever their identities are, is an exciting thing, right? I totally agree with Marcia. And so holding that seriousness for the need to do it, but also realize that like we're making the world a better place when we do so.
Absolutely. Phil, do you want to jump in?
Yes, I was sitting here and thinking about where we are, and making sure that as wonderful as this conversation is, and it is absolutely incredible that and thanks to KJRH, thanks to Tulsa Teacher Credit Union for taking the initiative and intentionality to have this type of conversation on a wide perspective, and that this is the beginning and not just a one and done. But we also have to recognize that even in 2021, we're still being awakened to the fact that these biases and these attitudes are still very deeply embedded. Just within the last 48 hours, we're all shocked by, just horrific comments made, at a basketball game in Norman, Oklahoma from a basketball announcer, and the graphic nature in which, that how freely it comes out when a person doesn't know that they're being listened to, and what comes out from their heart gets exposed. And, what it does is it should wake us up that as much as we are having these conversations, and as much as we are making positive progresses forward, that there's still a large segment of our population that still has received, or I should say, have been the benefit and received, things that they heard grandpa say, that they heard grandmama say, that they were raised in a certain environment where certain things were said about other people that embedded in that person's mind, way in the back of their psychology, their psyche. And then when things are pushed to pressure, or when things are pushed to shove, or an angst or anxiety moment, that comes out. And that's what we face when we talk about, communities of color, and even with some members of those who wear the badge. You have to recognize things that were taught to somebody inherently comes out in pressure. And so, we have to address these things. And when people say, we're no longer have a racist problem in this country, you have to stop and you have to listen. You have to pull back the emotion, but sit down and still be able to have, that gentleman, as offensive as that nature and offensive the things that he said, he'd be the first person that I say, you need to come to Greenwood Rising when it opens up, and I will take you on a personal tour, so that when you go through this, we can have a sit down and a conversation about where you go from here, now that you have been exposed and awakened to this. That's what we have to be willing to do. Be able to sit down with someone and not excommunicate them, not say, okay, you're no longer a part of society. That's the person that we want to reach, and say, we want to reach your heart and your mind and change the way you think about people who are different from you.
Absolutely.
And Karen, I'm going to jump in real quick and piggyback on what Phil said, but the work has to be done, and it will take time. And so what came to my mind is, how did the coronavirus spread. It spread starting out one person at a time, and then it just covered the world. And I think we're going to have these conversations, these intimate conversations, almost one person at a time, where we're totally vulnerable. I think about my son who's 17 and he has hair crazier than mine. And mine is combed. He doesn't comb his. And I say, oh, what is the world? What is this? What's the business community? What are the professors in college going to think about this kid when he shows up in Econ 101 and he has this wild hair? Will they see him and give him a chance to show his intelligence? And so we've got to start having these conversations now. And I think, as Allie talked about, some have started. One of the things that I've advocated for as chamber chair is that we have diversity dialogues, and that we do them in our corporations, in our communities, in our churches. We cross town, cross communities, and get together. And so I wholeheartedly agree with Phil. We've got to have these conversations, and one way we tend to really become more open and honest is over food. And if we can get people together at the dinner table, at your house, at my house, all over this city, I think we can start breaking some of the bondage that binds us as a community. And I want Tulsa to be the example of what a diverse, equitable, and inclusive community, city really feels like and really means.
Exactly.
I love what Rose is talking about. And that's exactly where our idea is sharing a meal, the power of sharing a meal. And on purpose, I would seat people who were completely on opposite sides of the spectrum at the table. And I would hold my breath for a few seconds at the beginning of the program, and we would go through and tell them, this is a safe space, and we're going to have these conversations, and we're going to be actively listening. But by the end of the night, I would have to say, okay, it's 10:30. We've been here for 3 hours. We've really got to go. And they have, built lasting bonding relationships after that. And I really want to touch on what Phil said. There are individuals who we come across all the time, tons of people who I've come across. And it's so hard. I know when I first started covering, when I first became an identifiable Muslim. So before I was covered, I wasn't identifiable. Everybody else thought I was, just a born and bred Tulsan, just like everybody else. But once I was identifiably Muslim, and at the beginning, it would upset me when somebody would tell me I was a terrorist, or when somebody would tell me to go back home or whatever. But after a couple of years, I started thinking to myself, okay, how can I have conversations with these individuals? And, even though, yes, it is upsetting, but saying, why don't we have a conversation about that? Why don't we understand? Let's talk about why you feel that way. Why do you feel like I'm damned to hell because I'm a Muslim and I'm not a Christian? Like, why don't we sit and have a conversation about that? And I cannot tell you the amount of conversations I've had and the lasting relationships I've built with people, just by having a conversation, right? And being real and honest with yourself and honest with the individual across the table from me, just having a cup of coffee. And so for us I know it's offensive, I understand, but not to be so defensive and just, you don't know what their experiences are. You don't know if they were wronged by somebody like that looked like you. And so just try and be vulnerable and having those conversations. I think it really makes a big difference.
Absolutely. I do want to ask each and every one of you, what we've talked about these meals, and Allie, I've been very fortunate to have attended one of your Tulsa Metropolitan Ministry meals. It was incredible sitting at a table with people from, I think there were 5 different faiths represented from all across the spectrum, and then the rabbi spoke, and it really was an incredibly eye-opening and genuine, and they really did have to kick us out because no one wanted to leave. So having a meal, that's a start. What else can we do?
Service projects are wonderful. Service projects, we do service projects all the time, right? When we have disasters that have happened here, we've come together and we've done disaster relief all together. Mm-hmm. Or, whether it was serving meals to, our indigent population or whatever it is, just doing those projects together during the holidays. coming together and doing things together, reaching out and getting small groups from here and there and trying to work together. I think is a great idea.
Clifton, what do you think? You've spoken all around the world about all of your different projects. You've talked to so many different people. What are some of the things we can do?
Well, one of the things that's really interesting to me, and I didn't start it, but in Boise, Idaho, I got a call one day, this was several years ago, and the city of Boise had decided to read a book that I had written, 8 Habits of the Heart. It's a very small book, but it has changed people all over the world. Sometimes in reading another person's story, it allows you to find yourself as well. And oftentimes it's difficult to talk about all of my problems or your problems, but when you put a book in the middle of the table, then the problem is in the middle of the table. It's not either of the people. And they began to read and talk and understand. Maybe we could have monthly opportunities where a book for the month for the city of Tulsa. That seemed like a lot, but they did this in Boise. And only reason I knew it was because they invited me to come and talk at the end of the time period. And I was absolutely shocked, blown away. First time I've ever experienced that. Haven't experienced it since, but there it was. And to watch all of those diversity of people coming together to talk about their city, but they were more or less talking about, how do I bring my heart to the table? Food was at every single one of them. Every house that was served was there. But the thing about it is that we have to get away from thinking that things can happen in 10 or 15 minutes and it's done. We're talking about generations of challenge. It is going to take more than a 15-minute episode to get something changed. It's a commitment to a new lifestyle.
Yes.
It's a commitment to doing things that we haven't done before, because our country, our city, and our families and our neighborhood mean just that much to us, that we are willing to do that.
Thank you, Clifton. We certainly appreciate your insight. Now, Risha, you talk with corporations and community groups. What can we do?
Right. When I started this 25 years ago here in Oklahoma, I just about starved. I'll be honest with you, it's taken so long. We don't have another 25 years, to have the amount of slow growth that we've had. And now that we have this opportunity, I believe that we have to listen, validate, and act. Listen to understand, not to reply. Validate the experiences of the people who are sharing their stories with you, and then create action around that. Because as much as these conversations are important for Black folks and people of color and other people that fall into a diverse category, we've been having the conversation since our lives began. We need to see action. So the conversations are great, but along with action, we have something where everybody wins. So whether that's dismantling racism, whether that is sharing the meals that we're talking about and being able to understand each other better, whether it's putting inclusive policies and anti-retaliation and zero tolerance policies into our companies so that we can make people feel as if they belong and that they can show up as they are authentically. We're going to have to listen, validate, and act.
All right, sounds like a great plan. Karen Keith, our elected official here, what can we encourage the citizens of Tulsa to do to step in and reach out to each other? Step out of those backyards, go into the front yards, reach out.
I think that's crucial. I love the idea of an intersection dinner where people really get together and talk. And then Clifton's idea of doing this book. I mean, I'm reading right now, Cast: The Origins of Our Discontent. Isabella Wilkerson wrote this book. There's just so many books out there right now that are good for us to read. And I think Phil, as we get ready to commemorate June 21st, could probably give us a great list of books to think about what's happening here and create some dialogue, because I think people get together over food and books, and there are wonderful outcomes. So, and I think long-term an objective for us needs to be more diversity in our elected leadership. So I think I'd like to see that happen. And I can see some darn good candidates right here on this screen. So,
Yes.
Bill Armstrong, thank you.
Yes. Phil, I'm going to finish with you. So hold up just for a second. Marcia, your recommendation for making a difference within our schools, opening dialogue within our schools, what do you advise?
Well, honestly, I think I'm going to start with my recommendation being very individual. I think each of us has the commitment, making the commitment of being very intentional and reflecting when we have interactions with people. Make it into our practice. If you have a check-in, if you're a manager and you've got a team member, how was that for you? What assumptions did I have? Hey, this is how we do it. Was it because of preference? Is it just because it's tradition, or is it a true requirement? Is this accessible for you? Those moments of checkpoints where both, regardless of power dynamic, if I'm the manager and I've got members in my team that I manage, that we all in an equal playing field have an opportunity to provide that critical feedback. I think that's very important. And just like the professor mentioned in the session, is to reflect and have those journals at the end of the day. And the other piece I want to name is actually advice that my father-in-law gives me, is that forgiveness is something that's liberating. We don't grow through shame. We don't grow through shame. And this idea, this bias, racism, all these isms, everyone in this call, I'm going to venture to say, has inflicted some harm unintentionally to someone, has been operating under a certain bias, and has also received harm of said bias as well, right? It's separating, forgiveness is not separating and absolving someone from accountability, but it's actually just instead naming this is a human thing. We live in society, but also tying it to what Risha's saying, an action. What are we going to do about it? What am I going to do about it? What can we collectively do about it? So that's kind of my piece for reflection.
Thank you so much.
Karen, I know we're going to wrap up, but I'd like to add that as employers, we've got to be more intentional about hiring diverse employees. And Dr. Marks talked about erasing names from resumes, whatever it takes. I think we've got to be more open and intentional about diversifying our workforces. Corporations and companies could, and I hope they will, create diversity supplier programs that give businesses owned by the underrepresented an opportunity to have preference when they're bidding on jobs. I think for us, sometimes we may feel a bit angry when we experience the biasness, whether implicit or not. And I think we've got to try to become more sympathetic and call people out and have a conversation with people to explain what their words and actions really felt like and really meant to us as receivers. The last thing I'll say is I used to remind my son that he needed to show extra respect to his teachers because they're people too. And everyone is fighting a battle that we know nothing about. And so if we can be patient and empathetic as we lift, as we rise and really help people uncover their implicit biases, I think we will build stronger, better communities.
Absolutely. Tomas, would you like to provide a last insight on our youth and how we can reach out?
Yes, I think kind of as far as adultism concerns and how we treat our youth, kind of acknowledging they're people too. They think the same, they learn the same way. Their lived experiences are just as crucial and unique to them as ours are to us. And you asked what we can do to kind of unlearn these things and take action. And the answer I have for youth and for adults is anything and everything, because what you do to make the world a better place, whether it's disseminating information, whether it's baking a pie, whether it's teaching the new generation, learning, having dinners, we all have a role to play in this world to make it a better place. And these things can be used to uplift communities that haven't been before. Whether you want to start a bake sale, whether you want to have an intersectional dinner, whether you want to put a book out, or you want to just get the call out and get everyone in the community on the same page. These are all things we can do anytime to really, really get the message out there. So we're talking the talk, and then we got to walk the walk, right? So I really value the opportunity in this country, in the city, to be able to voice our opinions to city officials and to the school boards and things like that. But I long for a system of accountability that takes what is said and is moved forward in a timely manner, because these things, like Risha had mentioned, are happening now and have been happening. So I hope for a city and a community that comes together and really holds themselves accountable to do better, because I believe in a better Tulsa. I believe I love where I live, and I know that as we get to have these conversations and address the wounds, we're going to heal and we'll be able to have a better understanding, so things like our history don't happen again.
Absolutely. All right, Ali, one last comment from you. Suggestions you might have with your experience with Tulsa Metropolitan Ministries on how we bring each other together.
Well, just like everybody said, I mean, trying to work together, trying to invite people to do, if we're doing projects, if we're doing whatever it is. I know with COVID, it's been very, very difficult. We switched our dinners to Zoom dinners. So, we would prepare our meals and sit in front of our laptops or our cameras and have those dinners. But, anytime we hear somebody in our community is in need, being able to rush to their aid, doing it safely, but rushing to their aid, and whoever that person or that group is that is in need, to be able to uplift our community members. I think it's vital. And so to be able to have the leadership that we have in Tulsa that is able to help us, however, they're able to help us to be able to open the pathways for us. So having that done with all of the leadership that we have in Tulsa, it's just wonderful that we're able to come together. Tulsa is very unique when it comes to the leadership that we have with all of our organizations, and we're very grateful to have everyone.
All right. And Phil, I wanted to finish with you deliberately, because we are counting down to a very important anniversary, if you will, the Tulsa Race Massacre. There is so much work being done in the Greenwood District right now. This is an opportunity for us all to reach out and help heal wounds, to assist in this project, and really, really spread the net, if you will, of sharing information. What would you like to see?
Well, I would be remiss if I did not mention the fact, and people have heard this statement many times, but I say this with all passion. I stand on the shoulders of those who paved the way for the work that we're doing now. The Centennial Commission has not owned this history. We have to pay homage to individuals who were fighting this fight when really no one was really listening. We have the advantage now that the world is listening and people are ready to come to the table. But when you look back at the early 90s and the work that Senator Maxine Horner, who, God bless her and her family, who's no longer with us, that started this fight with the Greenwood Cultural Center, and Representative Don Ross, that did a lot of fighting, and fighting in a good way to try to bring the awareness of this history that took place. And you bring about the Greenwood Cultural Center, and you look at the John Hope Franklin Center, who with the John Hope Franklin Park, 11 years in existence. And we talk about the food dinners. One of the most wonderful things that takes place in this city every year, led by the board of directors for the John Hope Franklin Center, is an annual dinner that they have. It's one of their key fundraisers. But at Greenwood Cultural Center, it's packed wall to wall with people sitting at tables of 8 to 10 at each table. And one of the things they require is just a dinner, and they have a speaker, but you cannot sit at a table where you know someone. And if you come with a group of people, they split you up and they purposefully sit you at tables where you don't know anyone else, and you sit down and you talk and build relationships. They've been doing that now for quite some time, led by Reuben Gant. And I say that to say we have to pay homage to those who paved the way to be where we are now. If there's one thing that we're looking at in 2021 and the commemorative events, commemorating this history, looking back at that horrific, tragic history, but being able to use that as the backdrop to say the next 100 years cannot be like the previous 100 years. And we've got to do this together. We have to come together. One of the things I'd love to see is someone like a Tomas and their generation, and then the generation of Clifton Talbert, where you have the energy of the youth, but you have the wisdom of the elders to be able to sit down and what would it look like for these young, vibrant, passionate young people, the woke generation, to sit back and maybe talk with those who paved the way, to hear what they went through, how they struggled, to give them the understanding. And that's what a lot of the work the Centennial Commission does and is going to do through Greenwood Rising, and what it's going to do to impact people when they get this history, when they're enlightened by it, but they leave that center in this area changed to do other work. And I started out with a quote, and I'll end with a quote. I love quotes by famous people. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who passed last year, this has become a mantra of mine. And she said this: fight with passion for things you believe in, but do it in such a way that others will want to join you. And that's what we're trying to do, is get people to see what we're doing, join us, and move forward together to a brighter future and racial reconciliation and harmony.
All right, Phil, thank you so much. Our sincere thanks to all the members of our community panel tonight: Clifton Talbert, Phil Armstrong, Risha Grant, Karen Keith, Marcia Bruno Todd, Rose Washington, Tomas Hilbert, Ali Shimmy. Thank you all so very, very much for your precious time and your insights and experience, for sharing it tonight. We really appreciate you. Dr. Bryant Marks in our special said implicit bias is much more about the machinery of your mind than the content of your character. He also said growth is going to happen at the edge of your comfort level, not within your comfort zone. So be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and our world will be better for it. Two Works for You, very proud to be part of this effort tonight. We thank you for joining us. We're going to